I'm Leo Walder for Kit Guru. Be Quiet Dark Base 700 is an impressive new PC case that accommodates an E80X motherboard and has a bunch of features that are of keen interest to me. Aluminium and steel construction, but for the moment my first focus is that tempered glass panel, which is absolutely gorgeous but reflecting light like crazy, so I'm going to remove it. It's really simple, 4 thumb screws and away it comes. With the glass removed you can get a good look inside and it's really clean and tidy. This is where the case gets interesting for me. It's doubly interesting partly because we only see Be Quiet cases every so often. They do not release a massive amount of cases. But in particular, it's because I'm looking for a case for my Threadripper build. And at the moment, my default is to repeat my previous build, which is a Phanteks Pro M glass. However, a case such as the Be Quiet strikes me as interesting for a number of reasons. It's got a really clean interior. If you don't install drives in certain positions, you can blank off the mount so you don't get a whole bunch of sort of sleds and bays and such like that are of no interest to you. The front panel does not have any optical drive bays, so this 700 is quite a bit smaller than the Dark Base 900, with which it shares some certain nominal similarities. However, one big similarity is you can invert the motherboard tray. I've tried that before with the 900 and also recently with the Cooler Master C700P. It's a feature that's interesting to certain users. It's not a feature I actually need to use, and therefore it's one that while I'll look at it with this Dark Base 700, it's not one I shall use myself. Very smooth front panel. You get 2 Silent Wings 3 fans installed, 140mm. They are good fans. The thing is, with certain cases you get fans included that are borderline junk. The Silent Wings 3s are good fans, therefore you can happily use them. This case has an integrated fan controller that can support up to 6 fans, so you can easily add another 4 Silent Wings 3s or any other make that you choose fans to this case, which is plenty of cooling. You can install a 360 radiator in the front or a 360 radiator in the roof, or a 120/140 in the rear. Many options for cooling, many options for drive, but it's the construction that first catches my eye, the combination of aluminium and steel, and also the glass panel just to show off the innards, and the I/O panel, which has a fan control switch which links into the fan controller. You've also got your usual power reset buttons. You've got a USB 3.1 Type-C. You've got a lighting control button because this case can integrate with all of the motherboard manufacturers' lighting, and you've got a couple of USB 3.0s. At first glance, there's nothing about this case that I don't like, and there are no obvious missing features. And it's not often you get to this stage of a review without a few question marks or alarm bells, and right now it's looking very positive indeed for Be Quiet. Pulling the Dark Base 700 apart is not difficult. The front panel I've got here slides on these plastic pins into rubbers, so basically you pull it, it comes off, and there's an electrical connection at the bottom, which means it's not tethered by cables to control the illumination in the front panel, which is a nice touch. So that comes away easily, and you can see it's also got noise deadening material inside. So that front panel is an illustration of a number of different things actually. A combination of materials, ease of assembly and disassembly, neat little feature there, and noise deadening. Well done Be Quiet, you're living up to your usual standards so far. Off with the glass, that's easy peasy, 4 thumb screws. Off with the back panel, that's 2 screws, that's got noise deadening material. The roof is fixed in place, it has some noise deadening material inside, the same as the front and side panels. You could, if you choose, remove the aluminium roof. There's a bunch of screws going around it, which is amazingly reminiscent of the Phanteks Pro M in particular. Phanteks may use that system in a couple of other cases, but certainly the Pro M, very familiar setup. And then you can, if you choose, take out the drive caddies from the back, which are the same caddies that go in place of those blanks there. So you get 1 accessory caddy in the box, you get 2 installed, 3 drive caddies in total, which means you cannot remove all of those blanks and replace them all with caddies unless you get a couple of extra caddies out of Be Quiet. And I'm not crystal clear if they're available as an accessory. Should ask. So that's so far dead straightforward. Now you can build your PC. But the flipping the motherboard thing, I'm not going to build the PC inverted, but I am going to take a brief look at that. It's quite straightforward. So I've already removed the fan hub and RGB hub that's on the back of the motherboard tray. That's 2 screws secure that because all the cabling goes to it. And that is very reminiscent of the Cooler Master C700P I reviewed, which is that the mechanics of the case are one thing, and then you've got a whole bunch of cables stringing along, which is another thing. And with the C700P, that was hard work because once you'd inverted the motherboard tray, you had to reroute all the cables, and it didn't really work all that well. I'm not going to lie, I've already done it to this case just to give it a trial run, and I know it works better than it does with the Cooler Master. Be Quiet has clearly thought this one through, but then they've done it before the Dark-Base 900, and that was a success. The radiator rack that slides into the top of the case is also highly reminiscent of the Phanteks Pro series. It's not brilliantly constructed, but it does a certain job. But essentially it slides in like a drawer of a filing cabinet, and it's held in place with 2 screws to stop it coming out. Phanteks uses, I think, 5, 2 on one side, 3 on the other. But this is designed to be put back in from the other side, so it's not exactly the same setup. It's just a similar concept, and that comes away. Obviously, if you're putting a liquid cooler or radiator in place in the top of the case, you slide it out, put it in, put it back. And now we're good to go. We've got 9 screws to remove in total. We flip out the motherboard tray, which can then be used as a test stand if you choose when you're doing a new build. And then you put it back in all the way up. 9 screws. 6 from the back and 3 from the front. And out comes the motherboard tray, which you can put down as a test bench if you want to install your motherboard and your graphics card and such like, and your CPU cooler, as a sort of a check everything fits in place job. I'm not absolutely sure I'd necessarily want to do that, because then putting the whole caboose back in place would be a bit of a fiddle. It's fiddly enough getting that motherboard tray back in place the other way around, getting the bits and pieces lined up to get the 9 screws in place, doing it the extra weight and so on. Not sure I want to do that, and I'm not sure if the motherboard being installed would also distort it slightly and cause further problems. Nonetheless, with the motherboard tray out, you can see it's an open structure, and the point is it's entirely symmetrical. That's the key thing. So once you put the motherboard tray back, you can flip the drive caddies around because they're currently accessed from this side. You can put them so they go from that side, power supply gets flipped over, top shroud goes back on, and so on and so on and so on. It's a decent setup. It works well. The only feature you don't get with this setup that you got with the 900 is that Dark-Base 900, also from Be Quiet, is that 900, which is a much bigger case, you could let the motherboard tray rise and fall 3 positions. This flips bang in the same height. So there's no reason why you should necessarily want to adjust the height. That was just handy if you wanted to put a particularly chunky radiator in a particular location, but it made the whole system somewhat more complicated than necessary. This, on the other hand, it's a little fiddly, but you're only going to do it once probably in the lifetime of your build. Works well, but it's not an option I'm going to use myself. The time is later, the PC's built, it looks good, and I suffered a small annoyance along the way, which I'll come to shortly. So the specification is an ASRock X399 Taichi motherboard, a Threadripper 1920X processor, that's the 12 core rather than the 16, a bunch of G-Skill Flare X DDR4 quad channel memory, there's a Samsung SSD in there. We've also got an EVGA GTX 1080 Ti graphics card, and in honour of Be Quiet, the power supply is a 750 watt Dark Power Pro 11. The CPU cooler is a Fractal Design Celsius S24, that's a 240mm Asetek 6th gen, mounted on the roof of the case on the slidey outy radiator rack. So everything is exactly as you'd expect. It looks good, it works absolutely fine. The snag that I mentioned is that the control board on the back of the case, sort of on the back of the motherboard really, that controls both RGB lighting and also fan speed, it's not working right. There's something wrong with it, and that's annoying. I've been trying to fault find it, and it's been going around the houses. No success. So I've had to connect the two Silent Wings 3 fans directly to the motherboard, and the lighting is not RGB, it's fixed. So we've got the lighting that's in the front of the case, that's just set on a white, and then I've extended it. On the control board there's an RGB header so you can extend the system, and I've used a Fantex LED RGB strip to do exactly that. So that's inside the case to give you some illumination, and that's also set to white. So I'm annoyed about the fact it's not working, but I think it is a very small leap of faith to think that Be Quiet can actually manufacture components that work. I just got unlucky. I shall ask them for a replacement just to confirm in my own mind that that's what's going on, but unfortunately there isn't time to do that before this case launches. Hence I've had to go with a known faulty part, and I'm annoyed. The control board is actually quite a complicated little bit of kit. In addition to the RGB function, which obviously these lights have to hook into it to be controlled, and you can extend it by connecting to an RGB header on the, in this instance, is ASRock motherboard, and you can extend the system with an extra control strip. That's the RGB side of things. And then the fans, that's also quite complicated. So it can control up, as I mentioned before, up to 6 PWM fans, but they're split in two halves. You can have them all set to the same, but you can, if you choose, have the one side of the board on one setting, the other side on the other. There are little flick switches, sort of high and low, not fan curves because they're flat, so constant speed. And then you can use the switch up on the front panel, either in PWM mode, in which case you do get curves, or 1, 2, 3, you know, slow, medium, fast. So you can either have the switches on the board are silent or performance mode, and then 1, 2 or 3. So 6 different constant rate fan speeds possible, and you can have 2 at any time, depending on whether you go for high or low mode on the board. But the board's not behaving, perhaps because it's so complicated. Anyway, I'm annoyed. Overall, the build went well. There were a couple of minor annoyances, and they really are minor. But the problem is that when I'm looking at a case that's this expensive, I don't really want any annoyances. So the big bits like that motherboard tray flip, that worked well enough, but the consequence of that, I think it's because of that anyway, is that cable routing is not actually that straightforward. Instead of having holes along the bottom of the motherboard tray where you can connect to the USB and to the audio, for example, you have to kind of route the cables around the rolled edge of the steel. I'm guessing that's because when you flip it, the bottom becomes the top. So the routing is not quite as tidy as I would have liked. It's not quite as easy. You have to kind of push cables through gaps. Not ideal. Not the end of the world. Similarly, I used quite a lot of cable ties in this build, about 20 surprisingly. That's because there are cables all over the shop, because you got the fans, you got the RGB lighting, this, that and the other, yada, yada, yada. And there are a lot of anchor points, so it's not the end of the world using lots of cable ties. It's just one of those personal little rules of thumb I got, which is if I can just whack in a system and use a couple of Velcro straps, no cable ties hardly at all, that strikes me as being a good day out. If I have to use 20 cable ties to kind of make the thing look right, that strikes me as a less good day out. So there we have it. Also, in the course of this, because I had to flip the motherboard tray just to see what it looked like and then flip it back, and I've been doing some fault finding with that hub, so I've been pulling off the front panel and such like, and diving in a bit deeper than I otherwise do. I've had most of the screws in this case out a good few times, in many instances up to 5 actually, including taking the top off the case, so I could have a good look at what was going on. And it strikes me the steel is not the greatest. It's 0.7mm SECC, which is absolutely standard for cases. In fact, some cases are thinner than that. So that's not a problem. But the threads are feeling a little bit weak, and there are sort of flecks of paint all over the place, which is generally a sign of something that's not quite top notch. I'm not suggesting for a second it's poor quality. It doesn't feel like that in the slightest. Although that slide out rack for the radiator in the top of the case, that flexed a great deal. I was surprised how much that flexed. But this is an expensive case, and therefore I expect it to be absolutely top notch, and it doesn't quite feel like it is. Having said that, it looks good, and the funny thing is now it's illuminated. I started this review saying it reminded me in many respects of the Fantex Pro M and also bits of Cooler Master and such like, and I'm now looking at it, I'm seeing Aerocool Project 7, which is a perfectly decent case. It's just funny how you kind of get these memories of other cases. So overall, the build is fine. It looks good. It's certainly tidy. And with the added illumination inside the case, I think it's fine. I mean, it's a Phanteks stick-in self-adhesive RGB strip, and they're never quite the tidiest way of doing things. But the effect is very pleasing. And cooling is good. Noise levels are very low. I mean, obviously I've got the glass off at the moment, but it is quiet, which is what I expect from a Be Quiet. In fact, that's probably the primary thing I expect. But it doesn't strike me that this is just a smaller version of the Dark Base 900. This seems to be somewhere in the middle ground between lower end cases and that super duper high end 900. It is certainly smaller. It doesn't feel to me quite the same quality as the 900. And that's a shame, because that 900, that was a superb case. And if they'd come up with basically a smaller, cheaper version of it, I'd have been entirely happy. As things are, I'm not entirely happy. I'm mostly happy. And that's annoying to me, because I'm using this review as a way of trialing various cases for my personal Threadripper with this ASRock board and the AMD processor. I'm trialing cases for my next PC build, and I honestly thought the Dark Base 700 was a strong contender. Now I'm not so sure. It's still on the list of to be considered, but it's not got that immediate gold, yep, that's the one. I'm going to consider it. I've got a couple of other cases lined up, but I'm not so sure about this one. It's good, but it's not brilliant. And that's a shame. It is worth mentioning before I close that the stock fans on the Fractal Design Celsius S24, they're 120mm, they are adorned with some Kit Guru logos. They are courtesy of some fan grills with a Z, supplied by a chap called Dean Sharkey, trade name Printed Grills, again with a Z. He trades as Sharkade.Reality Creations. Sharkade obviously his name. I'll put a link in the review. The fan grills, they're 3D printed, much like these others that he sent us as well. That strikes me as being a Fractal logo. That's some money. I think that's PC Gamer. And that's just a targety kind of thing. They're fun. They look good. They're certainly well made. And those Kit Guru logos, very nice. Nice to see. These fan grills are £14 each for 120mm grills. Let's face it, you're only going to want one or two in a case, aren't you? So a small amount to pay for a one-off thing for your PC build. So well done, Dean. Good work. If you like this video, thumbs up. If you don't, thumbs down. If you want more from Kit Guru, click to subscribe. I'm Leo Warder for Kit Guru. This is the Be Quiet Dark Base 700.